Good morning, or depending when you're watching this, good afternoon, good evening, or good night. My name's Ross and I was always told I had a voice for radio, so today I'm bringing you another round from the Xeon City Gym City Championship from down in Cornwall in the UK. This is an expanded format tournament, not like I said on the first video, and it is from black and white all the way through to breakthrough. It's 50 minutes, best of 3, so sit back, grab yourself a nice cold beverage, and enjoy a nice game from the Truro City Championship. Best of 3, 50 minutes, expanded, black and white to breakthrough. And of course, I should say a massive thank you to all who helped to run that tournament, the Sidden family. Lovely, lovely people, lovely, lovely tournament, and they made it very, very easy for me to record indeed. Alright, ladies and gentlemen, we have a very interesting game for you this round. We are, of course, at round 3 of Truro City Championships. Xeon City Gym very nicely allowing me to record here. On the left, we have got Angus Inkster, and he is... No, we haven't, sorry. We have got Kira Siddons. She is going to be playing Yveltal, and she is going to be going first. She gets an energy and a muscle band onto baby Yveltal. She gets a Verbank City Gym into play. Oh, but there's no laser and there's no supporter. Not a very good turn 1 at all. On the right, we actually have Angus Inkster, and he is going to be playing Accelgor. Now, this is a deck that received an awful lot of hype when Expanded first came around, and oh, now that's a very, very interesting play from Angus there. We'll get around to Angus's deck in a moment. Now, what he's just done is he's played a Jirachi. He's used Jirachi's ability to search for a supporter in his deck, and he's gone for an N. Now, usually this is not a situation in which you would want to play an N. He knows his opponent doesn't have a supporter. If Kira had a supporter, she would have played it last turn. So he knows that Kira doesn't have very much. He's now just given her a free hand refresh. Now, some of these Accelgor decks, because you're only playing 4 DCE, etc., don't play Juniper/Sycamore. But then again, a lot of them do play, because what you really want to do, and we'll talk about this more as we get through the game, but what Angus, or what a lot of these decks really want to do, is get down straight away, as soon as possible. They want their deck to be as small as possible, so that when you use deck and cover, your deck gets... Oh, and he does play Sycamore. I can only assume he had a handful of stuff he didn't want to discard this early. Although, to be honest, I would expect him to be playing cards like, well, probably, as I'm assuming he's only playing 4 DCE, I would expect to see him playing a Sacred Ash. So unless he had a handful of DCE there, I don't agree with that end play at all. Purely because there is, well, he's just given her, and you see here, she's probably going to have a much better time of it. Now, that was not quite the turn 1 Angus wanted. If he plays Wally, we don't know if he does. Now there comes a laser. That Remerade's not going to be doing very well. Can't remember how much... Oh, and actually, as we see there, those cool little poker chips with poison and all on, they were given out to every competitor at this City Championship today. So we've all got these funky little poison counters we can use, which is really quite awesome. They were given out to all competitors in a little goodie bag at the end, so that was really cool. So that Remerade, which evolves into Octillery, is going to get it a little bit. Now, essentially, Kira here, oh, and she plays her own N here. Kira's playing a fairly traditional Darkrai deck. She's playing lasers. I played her round 1. I'm fairly sure she isn't playing Maxie's Hidden Ball Trick. Now, if she was playing Maxie's Hidden Ball Trick, as I was at this tournament, she would be trying to find an Archeops very early, using Archeops' ability to stop Angus evolving his Pokemon, and that would basically be the end of the game, but she's not. Now, what Angus is going to do here, his deck really revolves around 2 Pokemon, Accelgor and Trevenant. Trevenant, when active, blocks your opponent playing trainers, but not you. Only when he's active, though, so you can use Lysandre to pull up a bench Pokemon. And Accelgor does deck and cover for 1 double colourless energy. Now, an interesting play from Kira here. What she's done is she's used her Dow's Machine to get rid of 2 dark energy, dark patched one of them straight away, and then gotten an N back. And of course she's going to want to do that because... Oh, and she gets a KO with... because that was essentially for 80 there 30 plus the muscle band is 50 plus the poison with Verbank is 80. So she gets a KO, and now she's got on a Darkrai out who's ready to go, quite frankly. So she's going to be hitting 90 to the active, 32, 1 on the bench. Now, if Angus can get an Accelgor and a DCE here, he can do Accelgor's Deck and Cover attack, which does 50 damage plus automatic paralysis and poison. So that Verbank City Gym could come back to haunt Kira here. And there is a super rod there. So yeah, in Angus's opening hand, he must have had multiple DCEs. Or else I just can't agree with that Jirachi play. The other thing is, of course, that one Night Spear will take out a Jirachi, or free residual 30 damage from the Night Spear, because remember it does 30 to the bench, will take out that Jirachi. Now, automatic paralysis comes around in Pokemon sometimes, but there's always a big downside to it, or it's very difficult to achieve, as we see a Shaman coming down from Angus. Oh, Angus actually plays his own Verbank, so Verbank was coming down at some point anyway. And the downside in this particular deck is that you have to shuffle Accelgor and all cards attached to it back into your deck. So what Angus wants is an Accelgor every turn, and you see he's got that Mew there. So what he can do is use the Mew to copy Accelgor's attack, and that means that he's going to be able to, you know, have one Accelgor on the bench, and then all he needs to find is a Mew and a DCE every turn. Otherwise, he'd need an Accelgor every turn and a Shelmet on the bench. And then next turn, he'd have to get an Accelgor and a Shelmet and a DCE pretty much every turn. So there's a really good play from Angus a second ago. A very innocuous play. He used a switch to get the Shelmet out of the active and put a Phantom with a Float Stone attached into the active. And what that did was, it gave him options. If he hits the Accelgor DCE, he can do the attack. If he doesn't, he can just leave the Trevenant in the active. And this is a very nice turn 2 from Angus here. And he's got the Muscle Band as well. So what he's going to be able to do here is use Deck and Cover for 70, plus 30 for the poison is 100, which means that that Yveltal, and the Muscle Band is huge on the maths here, that means he's going to be doing a total of 100, and at the end of Kira's turn, that 130 HP Yveltal is going to die from poison, meaning Angus will take a prize, and Kira will then have to put up a Pokemon to immediately get hit by the Accelgor. So Kira needs a 1 prize Pokemon on the bench here. And the maths is important here, because now, Angus is not playing Dusknoir here. Dusknoir allows you to move all of your opponent's damage counters around so that you can essentially never let them attack. If Angus is able to use Deck and Cover every single turn, the only time Kira will be able to attack here is where a Pokemon dies from at the end of Angus's turn. Because if it dies at the end of her turn, then Angus can just Deck and Cover and keep this going. So the maths is very, very important here. And Angus is going to be trying to use Muscle Band to manipulate it. So either playing a Muscle Band or not playing a Muscle Band as appropriate to make sure that the Pokemon dies at the end of Kira's turn, not at the end of Angus's. Now, the interesting thing here is that Angus is trying to use Trevenant here, because most people play 1 or 2 switches in their deck at the most. Maybe 1 AZ and 4 VS Seeker. So what Angus is trying to do is use the Trevenant there to basically say, look, you're not able to use trainers, which means you have no way to get out of paralysis. The only way to get out of paralysis, and Kira's going to have to put an EX active here, which is a real pain, because it's likely to get, I mean, she's only going to need, yeah, now there was an argument last turn that Angus should have used, Angus should have used Mew to attack, so then he'd only need a Mew DCE rather than a Shelmet Accelgor DCE every turn. So he's going to try and keep blocking Kira's trainers. Now, if he can't keep doing this and keep up, if he can't keep this going every turn, Trevenant's weak to dark. So Trevenant is going to die very, very quickly from either a Y-Cyclone or a Night Spear. So if Kira gets attacking, she's going to be in a very, very good position this game. It really just comes down to Angus. And this is one of those games, and I've talked about this before, and this does happen in Pokemon games. It's not really up to Kira the rest of this game. This game, match as a whole really, but definitely this game 1, it's coming purely down to the actions of Angus. And he wisely here gets another Phantump down to make sure that if that Trevenant goes down, he only needs to get a Phantump next turn. So he uses deck and cover with the Accelgor, and the Accelgor goes back into his deck, and he's going to have to try and find it next turn. Now, he's not doing any more damage with the Accelgor than he would be doing with the Mew. So, and although Darkrai is resistant to Psychic, the Yveltal is resistant to fighting. So if you're attacking a Darkrai, then yes, Accelgor does more damage. I think Angus would be better off here attacking with the Mew, because here, he's not having a deck and cover next turn. He had no Shelmet down. So the only way he can stream attacks, if he attacks with a Mew, he's got an Accelgor, and then he can either attack with the Accelgor next turn, or he can find a Mew DCE. As he had no Shelmet on the bench, and he is never going to have an Accelgor and a Shelmet on the bench in one go, because he's only got one bench space, he needs to be attacking with the Mew, who of course can copy the Accelgor. Now, while Lysandra comes down from Kira here, she can bring something else into the active, and now she is paralysed here, unfortunately. It should be turned to the right. Now, that's a turn potentially too early with that, although she is able to get a Dark Patch off here. The thing is, she knows she's not going to be paralysed next turn, so if she plays the Lysandra next turn, then she is going to be able to this is all right. She's going to be, if she waits a turn, she's not paralysed. She can play the Lysandra, bring up the, Shaman, to be honest, or the Mew, or the Jirachi, or whatever. In fact, she could bring up that Mew, hit it for 90 with the poison, and get the KO by attacking with the Darkrai. So I think that Lysandra was a turn early, because if you look at the board state here, Angus is not getting a deck and cover this turn. So she could have waited one turn, and then she could have been able to kill the Mew and take 2 prizes, whereas all she's really done here is poison the Jirachi, and, she's got to know that Angus is playing 4 Floatstones in this deck, because Floatstone is integral to the Trevenant. So if he can find one of those Floatstones, or an AZ, or a Switch, and we've already seen him play a Switch, or a Computer Search, or maybe a Dowsing Machine if he plays that, he gets a Jirachi out of the active, and all Kira really did from that Lysandra was 30 damage and a Dark Patch. So I think it was a turn too early. Now, there had better be a Skyfield in Angus's deck, because if there isn't a Skyfield in Angus's deck, he has just handicapped himself massively. Now, there comes a Hex Maniac. Now, that's not a stadium, it's a supporter. Now, that is a really big card here, because, of course, Kira is going to want to free retreat the Yveltal here, using... And actually, if she'd have taken my advice and used Lysandra this turn, she wouldn't be able to retreat the Yveltal. Now, if she's got an energy, Yveltal has a retreat cost of 2. So with an energy, she can manually retreat it. But she doesn't. So actually, and then there's, like I've always said, ladies and gentlemen, the players in the games have access to far more information than we do. That Hex Maniac messed everything up, because now Kira cannot free retreat with the Darkrai. Now, luckily here, that Jirachi is going to die at the end of Kira's turn, so she's going to get a KO here. And yes, it would be better if it died going into Kira's turn, but what she doesn't want to do is give Angus another turn to try and save the Jirachi. But you've got to think Angus plays Skyfield in this deck, because if I remember correctly, all he's playing is DCE in this deck. Just 4 DCE, because that's what you need for deck and cover. So he has no bench space left. which means he cannot use he can't play a Shelmet or an Accelgor. Now, he can still attack with Shaman for 30 and put it back into his hand, and he can use the Mew to copy Shaman's attack. So he's not kind of out of options. And there was a deck when Roaring Skies first came out, a lot of people did play a deck. Now, Kira is building up a lot of energy here, but she's building it up on EXs, so if the deck and cover does start again, she is in trouble. Now, one of the things... Oh, and it turns out the Yveltal is dying as well, so it looks like everyone's taken free prizes. Now, there was a deck when Roaring Skies came around which just used Shaman to do 30 damage or 50 with Muscle Band every turn, go into a Trevenant, and just basically do 50 damage every turn while trainer locking your opponent. Now, a deck like that would really hate to see a dark deck coming down opposite it. And that's the situation that we're in here. Now, Angus needs to get a Shelmet down. And if he plays a Wally or a Forest of Giant Plants, then that's what he needs here. Because, and when he gets the Accelgor down, he needs to be attacking with the Mew. Now, the problem is that Darkrai does have a resistance to Psychic, which means that the Mew will do deck and cover for 30. But remember, you've also got Poison with Burbank City Gym down, and you've got Automatic Paralysis. And if you can stream deck and covers, then that resistance becomes entirely irrelevant. It doesn't matter how little damage you're doing. If you're trainer locked and paralyzed every single turn, your only hope is drawing something like an AZ, which will give you a single turn to attack and get rid of a whole bunch of energy. So, it doesn't really matter at all. You know, the Darkrai's... Yeah, I mean, the Darkrai here, the resistance, like I say, it becomes irrelevant. It really, really does. Because... You know, if he gets a deck and cover every turn, he gets a deck and cover every turn. So, you know, the Darkrai's resistance becomes irrelevant. But of course, as I was saying, he needs to be able to stream the attackers here. And that's the key. And, of course, he's just, you know... He didn't get it last turn. Now, but you got to think he's probably just realised this. And this can be a problem with Accelgor, you know. It's a deck which... I suppose, sorry, I don't know why I paused for so long then. It's a deck which requires some careful play. Accelgor's a weird kind of deck. Because on the one hand, it's a case of you just deck and cover every turn and win. Maybe your opponent gets the all attack, it doesn't really matter. So it's almost like an autoplay deck. But the problem is, you've got to have an attacker every single turn. You've got to have Trevenant, so if your opponent does get a KO going, you've still got the Trevenants to block trainers in the subsequent turns. So, and that was the mistake that Angus made. Now, that 30 damage on the Shelmet will hopefully be irrelevant, because we should be seeing an Accelgor and a DCE coming down here. But, of course, we want to be attacking with the Mew. Now, here, it's not such a big deal. Now, if he gets a second Shelmet down, now we're rolling. Because a second Shelmet basically means I need an Accelgor DCE next turn. And, of course, getting an Accelgor DCE is just as easy / difficult as getting a Mew DCE. No, actually, I take that back. It's easier because Mew cannot be gotten with Level Ball, whereas Accelgor can. So in this situation, now he can attack with Accelgor, But he's got next turn sorted. He knows he's got the deck and cover coming next turn. And he's already got, we see he's got 2 DCEs in hand there. That's fantastic. The question is, now he's got an Ultra Ball in hand. So now he knows he's getting the KO. If he looks at his hand and he goes, well, I've got a DCE, but I have no way to get a KO next. I have no way to get another Pokemon next turn. Maybe you attack with the Mew and go, you know what, I'm going to attack with Mew this turn. I know I've got a DCE to attack with Accelgor next turn. And then I've still got at least one shop it down. So you're building it turn on turn. And you need to be thinking ahead with this Accelgor deck. You need to be planning ahead. Angus looks at his hand and he sees he's got an Ultra Ball and a DCE, so he knows he's getting the attack with Accelgor next turn, but maybe if he attacks with the Mew this turn, he gets a second Accelgor next turn, and then instead of having 2 turns of deck and cover all sorted out, he's got 3 turns of deck and cover all sorted out, which makes it much, much easier for him. So, he's got the Accelgor, he's got the DCE, now he needs to get a Shelmet down, and if he doesn't get a Shelmet down, he needs to be attacking with Mew. Because if he doesn't get a Shelmet down, and he attacks with Accelgor, he is guaranteeing not having a deck and cover next turn. Now, the other thing you want to do with this deck, and this is what I was alluding to in the early turns, you want to get your deck down as low as possible. Especially, and we know obviously he hasn't, but because the Remoraid got KO'd. But if you get an Octillery out, and you can get your deck down to 3 or 4 cards, then essentially, you want to get your deck down to maybe, you know, I mean, the absolute perfect scenario is your entire deck is Accelgor, Shelmet, DCE. And you've got something like an Octillery on the bench. Every single turn, you draw your entire deck, attack, and then you shuffle those 3 cards in that you get back with Octillery the following turn. So you guarantee that, and that's what a lot of these decks aim for. You're trying to guarantee the deck and cover the following turn by making sure that the only cards in your deck allow you to deck and cover. So, you know, you have 2 Shelmets left, one's on your bench, one turns into an Accelgor and attacks, and then you're guaranteed to draw an Accelgor DCE Shelmet the following turn and keep it rolling. Now, it's very difficult to do, but that's what I was talking about back at the beginning of the game. When I talked about using, you know, going for a Sycamore off of the Jirachi, that was another one of the things to which I was alluding. However, we're burying the lead a little bit here. We are in a situation where Kira's down to 2 prizes, and there are 3 now weak EXs on the bench. But it doesn't really matter. Now, if he doesn't draw an Accelgor here, Angus is going to look silly for not attacking with Mew next turn. Because he's got the DCE, so he was guaranteed a deck and cover if he attacked with Mew last turn and had an Accelgor on the bench. But he doesn't because he attacked with Accelgor. But he gets the Accelgor, he gets the Muscle Band, and Kira basically just showing Angus, look mate, I had nothing. And this is what happens against the Accelgor deck, and I didn't want to get something like this on stream every single round, but I think it's quite good to have something like this every round. Or at least once a tournament. I like to show off these kind of decks, because Accelgor, it was really, really hyped. When Expanded came around, everyone said, well, hang on a second. We've got Forest of Giant Plants. We've got Wally. So now you can evolve Phantump into Trevenant using Wally on the first turn of the game, and off you go. You can get a Vileplume and Accelgor. Both of them can be evolved up using Forest of Giant Plants. And you can, you know, you can have turn 1 Trainer Lock and Accelgor paralyzing them all game. It was something that caught a lot of people's attention, and lots of testing was done. And yet, when Expanded shook out, we saw Seismitoad, Vespiquen, Flareon, Yveltal, Night March, all the decks we expected to be big, except for Accelgor. It never really made it. Now, part of it's a consistency issue, and part of it is it's a very difficult deck to play, and a lot of people would prefer to play something a bit, I suppose a bit more straightforward. Now, the other thing is, and this is actually, thinking about it, this is probably what killed Accelgor more than anything else. There are a lot of hard counters to Accelgor. Edgeslash's ability stops attacks from Pokemon with DCE. Beats Accelgor, because you can't do... Oh, and he starts Remoraid again. Oh, and this is an awkward one. Does he leave the Phantump active? And we all know Phantump's weak to Dark, so he gets killed very easily. Or does he leave the Remoraid active? Now, we saw he didn't have Octillery last game, but we saw that didn't really slow him down last game. Now, or something like, for instance... what's that Pokemon I was mentioning earlier? Wait for it. Fossil Pokemon. Bird. Archeops, there we go. Archeops comes out, stops you evolving from your hand. Now, every time you attack with Accelgor, he goes into your bench, you need to keep evolving. That means that if your opponent plays an Archeops, your only hope is that you've already evolved an Accelgor and a Trevenant, and that you use Mew every turn. But of course, the problem with that is if that Accelgor/Trevenant ever get KO'd, you can't get a new one. Now, we do see a Mewtwo from Kira, and one of the problems with Kira's deck, and I'm not saying it's a problem with her deck, I'm not saying it's a poorly made deck, that would be very rude of me. I'm talking specifically in this matchup. One of the problems with Kira's deck, and she did have a better start because she got a Juniper that turn, is that she is playing a lot of EXs. Now, she's playing powerful EXs. She's playing EXs that help her in a lot of games. That's bad. Now, you only need one DCE to deck and cover, but you need to find it every turn. It looks like that looked like 2 DCEs, which means it's going to be much more difficult for Angus to find a DCE every turn, because now he's only got 2 in his deck. The priority for Angus in this game now needs to be, I am just going to go through my deck at a rate of knots. I am going to discard stuff and discard stuff and discard stuff, because I only need, really, if you can get your deck low enough, you need a 2/2 Accelgor line. I mean, to be honest, if you get it really low, you need 2 Shelmet, 1 Accelgor, and 1 DCE. 1 Shelmet that's evolved, 1 on the bench ready to evolve next turn, 1 DCE. Oh, and a Muscle Band, I suppose. Although you don't even need that if you're deck and covering every turn. So getting rid of those 2 DCE can be a problem, but it's not the end of the world if he can get through his deck fast enough. Now, I was saying about the BEXs in Kira's deck. A lot of Baby Yveltal would be beautiful in this matchup because it would really help her to KO those Trevenants. However, although to be fair, Trevenant has an annoying, I believe, 110 HP, which means that with a Muscle Band, you're doing 100 because you're only you're hitting 30 plus 20 for the Muscle Band is 50 times 2 for the weakness is 100. So that's a bit of a problem. You're only hitting 100 there, and you can't laser because Trevenant's blocking your trainers. But and we see an end coming down from Kira. They're getting her a new hand. But Baby Yveltal will be useful. But again, it really is going to come down to whether Angus can be deck and covering every turn. It's as simple as that. If he can be deck and covering every turn, those big EXs are going to be a liability. And hopefully, Kira is going to be able to put herself in a position, Angus is going to be able to put himself in a position where Kira's Pokemon are going to be dying coming into his turn through the use of Muscle Band or not as appropriate. So that's really what it's going to come down to here. Now, he manages to keep the Remoraid alive, and that's awesome, but remember, it can be easily KO'd if Kira were to be able to get a Darkrai out and attacking. But of course, at the beginning of the last game, after Angus's end, she was able to get going. She got free energy on a Darkrai. I think she did it in 1 turn because she attached and she Dark Patched, and then she used Baby Yveltal to attach one. Angus there taking advantage of the fact that Kira put Burbank City Gym by discarding 2 of his with Ultra Ball. They both seem to only play Burbank as their only stadium, which means that the 2 Burbank in Angus's hand are dead cards. They will do nothing all game. You can't play a Burbank if there's a Burbank in play. I don't know why he played a switch there. He had a Floatstone already on the Trevenant, and if he misses the Accelgor, then that Shelmet's just there ready to get KO'd. Now he gets the Accelgor, but it was a risky play. Now don't get me wrong, I know, and we've all been there. I'm going to play a Sycamore, I'm going to play these cards even though they literally do nothing. I'm going to play 2 more Laser because I'm going to be, Junipering them away. The problem is, if he'd missed the Accelgor then, that would have been big egg on the face because he... a DCE, and there would have been a Y-Cyclone for a KO. Luckily, he hits the Accelgor, he hits a DCE. Even if he misses the DCE, the Accelgor has a free retreat, which is weird, because I think Shelmet's is a retreat cost of 3, as in more than 2, rather than 3 for Accelgor, as in less than 1. So, once again... it looks like Angus's deck is doing what it's supposed to do. Now, no one's taking any prizes. We're early in the game. But Kira's got a bunch of EXs down and 1 energy on the field. Oh. Now, here's an interesting one. Angus ain't having a deck and cover next turn. Now, we got Poison, we got Paralysis, which... I love those Paralysis counters, but I do have to point out, and I personally, I don't care. I don't think it's terribly important. As long as both players know the Pokemon's paralyzed, I'm cool with it. But you really should turn it to the right rather than using a counter. Just putting it out there. Although, want to point out, I love them counters. Loved them. So, Yveltal here is poisoned and paralyzed. He's got a whole bunch of damage on. Sycamore comes down. And that was really the only thing he could do there. He needed to draw into cards. Now, it's not the end of the world, but we know that Trevenant's going down this turn. And now he gets a Shelmet. He needs a Phantump as well. He needs to play that level ball and get a Phantump. Because that Trevenant's going down. Now, he's only got 2 choices here, Angus. He can either retreat the Phantump into the Trevenant into the Remoraid, say goodbye to the Remoraid, and the chance of an Octillery in the process, and give Kira a turn of trainers, but keep the Trevenant, or he can let Kira kill the Trevenant and hope he can get another one next turn. Now remember, even if he gets a Trevenant, he needs a Floatstone on the Trevenant. Trevenant's got a retreat cost of 3, as in more than 2. And that means that if he doesn't have a Floatstone, he decks and covers, he puts Trevenant into the active and blocks trainers, but then Trevenant is stuck in the active, which is how I could say with some confidence in the previous game that Angus would be playing 4 Floatstone, because in this deck, you kind of have to play 4 Floatstone. You don't really have a choice. So, and I like this play. I do like this play. He uses Ultra Ball to get himself an Octillery, and he's going to be able to play the Octillery and draw at least 3 cards just this turn. Oh, and he's got a Trevenant for next turn. And he's got... Oh, okay. Oh, that was a beautiful, beautiful set of 3 cards there. He got a Shelmet, so he's got 2 down now, so even when he attacks with Accelgor, he's got another one. He got a DCE, which he can use next turn for deck and cover, and he got a Computer Search. So whatever he doesn't have next turn, whether it's a Trevenant, whether it's a Floatstone, whether it's an Accelgor, he can get it with the Computer Search. Now, Sycamore gets played there. Also, one thing which is really underrated that Angus is doing superbly in this game, he's not playing the DCE until he decks and covers. Now, in that previous turn, he could have put a DCE onto the Shelmet. But of course, had he done that, maybe Kira plays a Lysandra and kills it. Maybe she plays a Lysandra, kills something else, but plays an enhanced hammer to get rid of the DCE. Maybe Kira plays a Zerosic. I mean, I doubt she does, but maybe she does. There are a whole bunch of things that Kira could do to get rid of that DCE had Angus carelessly left it on the active. And she didn't do it. Now, why Cyclone? Wait, why Cyclone? Why Cyclone's not optional? Okay, now I don't know what she did there. If she used Evil Ball, she would have got the KO. If she used Y Cyclone, she would have got the KO. But if you use Y Cyclone, you have to move one of the energy to one of your bench Pokemon. It's not optional. So either Kira used Y Cyclone and didn't move the energy, or she used Evil Ball when she could have used Y Cyclone and moved the energy. So a slight missed opportunity there from Kira. I should point out that both of these players are newer players, they're local players, they don't have, all the experience. I'm going to sit here and point out plays that could have been made, just so we're clear. We've all made mistakes playing Pokemon. I mean, and I've told this story many a time, but the last time I went to the ECC in 2014, I lost in top 8 because I attached a silver bangle to the wrong Pokemon. Now, that game wasn't recorded, but had it been recorded, anyone watching it back would have watched that game and gone, you've just given away a top 8 or top 4 place in the biggest tournament in Europe on a ridiculous misplay. So I'm going to keep pointing out, things that people either do wrong or could do better, etc. But do bear in mind that, we're not all perfect. Mistakes are made. And I'm putting extra pressure on these people because I'm having them play on stream. And when you know that your game's going to be watched back by a few hundred people, it does add a little bit more pressure. I mean, heck, I don't like putting myself on stream. I like showcasing other players. But on the occasions I have put myself on stream, I've made mistakes. Luckily, I believe I lost in round 3 of this tournament and then made top 4 and dropped to go to a Christmas party. Or scooped in top 4, I should say, to go to a Christmas party. So I managed to avoid getting myself on stream. Had I won round 2-3 and gone 3-0, I probably would have had to put myself on stream. So Angus here. Okay, Kira took a prize last turn. She knocked out his... He doesn't have a float stone. That could be big. That could be big. And we see a Hex Maniac coming down. One thing Now, here's where a Mew would be really helpful. Actually, no, it wouldn't do all. Now, Mew would actually get a one-hit KO there. Now, maybe you don't want a one-hit KO because then it gives Kira a turn of attacking. But that... okay. I can see the logic here. Mew there with a Muscle Band actually would have done 140 and then the Mewtwo would have died from poison. But then it would have given Kira a turn to attack. I like what Angus did there. He's given Kira a turn of trainers by putting the Octillery into the active. He's sacrificing his Octillery, and what he's basically doing here, he's going kind of long-term, short-term, which makes me sound like I'm back teaching business again. In the short term, this is a real pain. He gives Kira a turn of trainers, and she's going to KO his Octillery, which we've already seen how useful that can be. But in the long term, he's got his Trevenant, and he's got a Shelmet down on the bench. Because think about it this way, ladies and gentlemen. Oh, the Octillery's not actually dead. He is asleep. Did he wake up? I think he woke up. I didn't see. Now, the key here is that even if the Octillery goes down, Angus has a turn to put a Phantom down. Now, if he allows Kira to KO the Trevenant on her previous turn, she gets a turn with trainers. Guaranteed. Absolutely guaranteed. Because there was no Phantom down. There would be no Trevenant at the end of this turn. He gave her a turn of trainers, but in doing so, he, I suppose, raised the possibility of only one turn of trainers. And it gave him an extra turn to try and get that float stone. Now, he hasn't got the float stone yet. So he looks like he's playing a Colress for 6. Now, remember that when he plays that Colress for 6, he's then going to be able to potentially play a few cards and then use Octillery to draw even more cards, and his deck is getting very, very low. And this is where we're less worried about those DCEs he discarded in the early game. Doesn't really matter. Well, assuming he draws a DCE, of course. But if he doesn't, he's got a muscle band he can attach there. He's got a Shelmet he can put on the bench. I'd like a Phantom on the bench. Because the problem is, if that Trevenant goes down now, there is no extra Phantom. Now, remember, he can attach that muscle band and draw a couple of cards. Did he draw an extra card? I don't think it really matters in the end. But did he draw 7 off that Colress? Because he had 4 bench Pokemon, and Kira had 2. Looks like he played 2 cards, and then drew 1. No, that would be right, yeah, because he drew 6, played 2, put him down to 4, and drew 1 to put him up to 5, so that's fine. Not a problem at all. Now, it looks like he missed the deck and cover for lack of a DCE that turn. He was in an awkward position. I certainly wouldn't put the Mew in the active. I'd put the Shaman in the active. But if he puts a Mew in the active, it gets KO'd, and then he can just get doing his Fang next turn. And I like the Mew play. Now, here are Angus's options. Leave the Octillery in the active. Well, it dies going into Kira's turn, so that's not an option. Put the Shelmet or the Accelgor in the active, well, they get KO'd and they're pretty darn important. Put the Trevenant in the active, well, that will probably get KO'd, and there goes Trainer Lock. Put the Shaman in the active, well, that can get KO'd by a Darkrai of a Muscle Band, and then Kira will also KO the Octillery on the bench and take a free prize turn. Or put Mew in the active. Now, putting Mew in the active might seem silly, but what it basically does is say, look, you're going to have to attack it with Mewtwo. Mewtwo's going to die of poison at the end of your turn, and if you don't get a third energy / muscle band, you're not getting the KO anyway. So actually, as much as I looked at the Mew and I was like, oh, Mew against Mewtwo, that's dodgy, actually, it was the better play. Now we got 2 Accelgors down. That Mew isn't quite dead. Now, does it have a Muscle Band or a Float Stone is the question. Oh, and this has worked out beautifully for Angus. I've been, I suppose, throwing coal on the fire of the Mew train. We're going old school steam train metaphors here. Since the beginning of this game. And actually here he uses it to, really help the Mew. To heal it. So that worked out quite nicely. Now, even if Kira had gotten a third energy or a muscle band, she takes 2 prizes. Angus takes 2 prizes. And crucially, that Mew was not needed. The Accelgors are needed. The Trevenants are needed. The Mew wasn't. Now, he could have gone for the Shaman, but then he's got to try and get the Shaman out of the active. Whereas if you leave the Mew in the active, you can use deck and cover. If you leave Shaman in the active, then you lose that opportunity. Oh, now this is going to be a juicy turn if she's got an energy. Oh, if she had an energy, that's a free prize turn. She can KO the Octillery on the bench and she can KO the Shaman. She doesn't have the energy, so she doesn't get the free prize turn. And that is... oh, that's disappointing. And I think we've gotten to the stage of the game here where we can probably say it's just not looking good for Kira. I don't really know what she's going to be able to do here. She's got 1 Pokemon with 2 energy, which isn't enough to attack. It's poisoned. It's going to die soon. And you're going to wonder, let's say she gets an energy next turn. You know, she needs to be she needs one of those turns where she gets an energy and a pair of dark patches and isn't under trainer lock. That's really what it's going to take for her to come back into this. Because as it stands at the moment... Oh, and it doesn't look like she got an energy then either. Now, has she even got any trainers she can use? It's like a Crushing Hammer and a Team Flare Grunt and a Verbank City Gym. And that's depressing. There's nothing worse than playing... Oh, she did get the energy. She did get the energy that turn. Although, you know, she's now had to open up to deck and cover, and she's getting into a position here where it looks like that Dark Rose going down this turn. If there's 3 dice, that's looking at least 130. So the Dark Rose going down this turn, and that means no Dark Patch. Now, Angus is still really going to be looking for that Float Stone here. There's nothing worse than when you're trainer locked turn after turn after turn, and then finally, like a shining ray of light, you are suddenly not trainer locked anymore. And you start thanking the heavens for the wonderfulness of no longer being trainer locked. And then it turns out you've got a hand of unplayable rubbish. And the trainer lock, you know, you might as well be trainer locked. And yeah, now the Seismitoad maybe would have helped there in slowing Angus down, but remember he's weak to Accelgor, so one deck and cover really would have hurt. Thank you to both of those players for agreeing to be on stream. I really appreciate it. Thank you to all the lovely people in Truro at Xeon City Gym for allowing me to record and making it incredibly easy. Thank you very much for watching. Make sure you comment, like, and subscribe as usual. Thank you very much for watching. My name is Ross, and you've been watching PTCG Radio.